The Cubs weaponized breakfast at 600 hours, and I couldn't file the incident report because they'd organized a defensive perimeter around the T-station. Let me back up. You need context for this madness. I'm Thelkson, been running the station childcare facility for 12 cycles now. 12 cycles of managing predator cubs, which means 12 cycles of controlled chaos, supervised violence, and carefully monitored pack dynamics. I had protocols. I had procedures. I had 3 advanced degrees in developmental xenopsychology and a wall full of certifications that said I knew exactly how to handle quadrupedal carnivore young. Then Petra showed up, and my credentials became decorative. She was human, an archaeologist, which I learned is someone who studies dead civilizations by digging through their garbage. The station hired her to catalog artifacts from the Relnoth excavation, 4th sublevel, where nobody wanted to work because the dust made everyone sneeze for weeks. Petra didn't mind. She said something about how all dust was basically the same once you'd been buried in enough dig sites. I should have recognized the warning signs right there. Morning of the incident, I walked into the childcare facility at 05:45 hours, like always. I had my station pad, my incident log, and my carefully prepared speech about appropriate pack behavior for the day shift cubs. 23 of them this rotation. 23 bundles of fur and fangs and claws that could technically rip through hull plating if they got excited enough. The facility was quiet. That should have been my first clue. Predator cubs are never quiet unless they're sleeping or dead, and I could see movement through the observation window. I palmed the door access. The panel beeped. The door slid open. Every single cup from the T-station had been moved. Not knocked over, not scattered. Moved. Arranged. The cubs had built a circular formation 3 layers deep, with the larger cups on the outside and the smaller ones creating an interior defensive structure that would have made a military strategist weep with pride. And they were defending it. 6 cubs on the outer perimeter, low to the ground, ears flat, watching every approach vector. 4 more at cardinal points around the formation, slightly elevated on furniture they'd dragged into position. The rest positioned in supporting roles, creating overlapping fields of awareness that covered every possible angle of attack. I stood there, pad hanging loose in my hand, trying to figure out which protocol applied to this situation. There wasn't one. In 12 cycles of childcare management, I'd dealt with escape attempts, pack fights, furniture destruction, and one memorable incident involving a waste reclamation unit that I still didn't like thinking about. Nobody had ever mentioned what to do when the cubs formed a military perimeter around the breakfast station. The largest cub, the one we called Tusk because of the prominent canines, made a low rumbling sound, not a growl, something more complex. The other cubs shifted positions slightly, tightening their formation. I reached for my comm. "Vector, this is Thelchin. I need security in childcare facility 1. We have a situation." Define situation. Vector always sounded bored. 8 cycles in station security did that. "The cubs have fortified the T-station." Silence on the comm. Then, "Say that again." "They've built defensive positions. They're maintaining a perimeter. They've demonstrated tactical coordination that shouldn't be possible for their developmental stage. Are they aggressive?" I watched Tusk track my movements, head low, body coiled. "They're defending their position. That's not the same as aggressive, but I wouldn't recommend testing their boundaries right now." On my way. I kept my distance from the formation. The cubs watched me. I watched them. We maintained this standoff for approximately 4 minutes. Then Petra walked in. She had a bag over one shoulder, the kind humans use to carry their portable computing equipment, and whatever else they think they might need during a work cycle. Her hair was tied back in a messy knot. She had dust on her boots. She looked like she'd already been awake for hours, which was probably true. Archaeologists kept strange schedules. She stopped just inside the door, took in the situation with one long look and said, "Huh, that's new." "Don't approach them," I said. "They've established a defensive perimeter, and they're maintaining coordinated positions." Petra looked at me, then at the cubs, then back at me. "I just need tea. The tea station is inside their formation. I can see that." She walked toward the cubs. I reached for her arm. "Petra, I just explained the situation. They're demonstrating combat-ready positioning. You can't just walk into their defensive perimeter." She gave me the look, the one humans use when they're being patient with someone who's stating something incredibly obvious. "Thelkson, I've been coming here every morning for 3 weeks. They know me. That doesn't mean they'll recognize you as non-threatening when they're in defensive mode. Their instincts will override pack familiarity." "Okay." She kept walking. The outer perimeter cubs tracked her approach. Ears swiveled, bodies tensed. Tusk's rumble got deeper. Petra stopped at the formation edge. She didn't crouch, didn't make herself smaller, didn't do any of the de-escalation techniques we taught in basic xenopsychology. She just stood there, looking down at the cubs. "Morning," she said. "I need to get to the tea. You mind?" Tusk made a different sound, higher pitched, almost interrogative. Petra shifted her bag. "I'm not here for the cups. I know those are yours now. I just need the hot water dispenser and one of the tea bags from the upper cabinet. Then I'll get out of your territory." Territory. She called it territory. Like the cubs were claiming sovereign space. Tusk turned his head, made a short bark at the cubs behind him. The formation split. Just slightly. Just enough to create a path to the tea station that didn't compromise their defensive positions. Petra walked through like she was strolling through a park. The cubs maintained their positions, tracking her movement, but not interfering. She reached the tea station, pulled out her personal mug from her bag, filled it with hot water, added a tea bag, and walked back out through the same path. The formation closed behind her. She took a sip of tea, looked at me over the rim of her mug and said, "They're doing great. They've militarized breakfast. They've established a defensive formation around a resource they value. That's actually pretty sophisticated behavior." She took another sip. "You see how they maintained overlapping sight lines? And the way they created that corridor for me without breaking their perimeter integrity? That's really impressive spatial reasoning. Petra, they're not supposed to be able to do this. Their neural development doesn't support this level of strategic thinking. Maybe your baseline assumptions are wrong." I wanted to argue. I had the research ready. I'd read every paper on predator-cub cognitive development. I knew their capabilities. I knew their limitations. Except the cubs were currently demonstrating capabilities that shouldn't exist. Petra walked over to one of the observation benches and sat down, cradling her tea. The cubs ignored her. They maintained their formation, watching me, watching the door, maintaining their secure perimeter. "What did you do?" I asked. "I made tea." "Before that, what did you do to make them act like this?" She looked genuinely confused. "Nothing. I come in every morning, make tea, work on my artifact documentation. Sometimes I talk to them about excavation techniques. They like listening. You talk to them about archaeology. It's interesting. Well, I think it's interesting. They seem to think it's interesting too." She gestured at the formation with her mug. I was explaining defensive architecture yesterday, ancient fortification strategies, how early civilizations protected their resources before they developed more sophisticated social structures. I stared at her. You explained military history to predator cubs. Archaeological analysis of defensive structures, she corrected. There's a difference. I'm not teaching them warfare. I'm discussing how populations establish security measures around valuable resources when they're in the early stages of social organization. And then they built fortifications. Looks like it. She sounded pleased. The door slid open. Vector came in with 2 security personnel, all of them with stun batons ready. The cubs saw them. The formation tightened. Tusk's rumble became a warning growl. The other cubs picked it up, creating a chorus of threat sounds that made my instincts scream about imminent violence. "Hold position," Vector said to his team. He assessed the situation with professional calm. "That's a combat formation." "I know," I said. "They're cubs." "I know. Cubs don't form combat formations. Apparently these ones do." Petra raised her hand like she was in a lecture hall. "They're not in combat mode. They're in defensive mode. There's a difference. Combat implies intent to engage. Defense implies intent to protect. They're protecting the cups." Vector looked at her. "The cups. They've claimed them as resources. They've organized around protecting those resources. It's actually a really elegant solution to resource scarcity in a pack environment. There is no resource scarcity. This is a childcare facility. They have everything they need. But they don't know that. From their perspective, valuable items are limited, so they're establishing control. It's basic survival instinct combined with emerging organizational capability." Vector's translator made a sound that indicated he was frustrated. "I need those cubs to disperse and return to normal pack behavior." "Why?" Petra asked. "Because they've weaponized breakfast. They've organized around a resource. That's not the same as weaponization. They're maintaining a military perimeter, a defensive perimeter, and they're doing it really well, which suggests their cognitive development is more advanced than your baseline assessments indicated." I watched this conversation happen. I watched Vector, who had maintained station security through 3 different hostile boarding attempts, try to argue behavioral psychology with a human archaeologist who studied dead civilizations. I watched him lose. "Thelgson," Vector said, turning to me. "Your facility. Your call. Do we intervene?" I looked at the cubs. They were still in formation, still coordinated, still maintaining their positions with a level of sophistication that shouldn't be possible. I looked at Petra, sitting on her bench, drinking tea, completely unconcerned. "Give me a minute," I said. I approached the formation slowly. The cubs tracked me. Tusk moved to intercept position, placing himself between me and the interior of the defensive structure. "I'm not here for the cups," I said, feeling ridiculous. "I need to access the nutritional dispenser. The cubs need to eat." Tusk didn't move. Petra called out from her bench. "Try asking permission." "What?" "Ask permission to enter their territory. They've established it. Respect the boundary." This was insane. This violated every protocol about maintaining authority with predator cubs. You didn't ask permission. You established dominance. You maintained control. But I also didn't have a protocol for cubs who organized defensive formations. "May I enter your territory to access the food dispenser?" I asked, feeling my professional credibility die with each word. Tusk looked at me, made a sound at the other cubs. The formation shifted, creating a different corridor, one that led to the nutritional dispenser but kept me away from the cups. I walked through. The cubs maintained position. I reached the dispenser, initiated the feeding cycle, and walked back out. The formation held. "This is unacceptable," Vector said. "They can't be allowed to maintain territorial control of a station facility." "Why not?" Petra asked. "They're not hurting anyone. They're not preventing necessary operations. They've even created access corridors for essential functions. That's more cooperation than most adults show." "They're cubs. Smart cubs." Tusk made another sound. The cubs responded, tightening formation again, but this time some of them moved toward the nutritional dispenser. They ate in shifts, maintaining perimeter security, while individuals broke away to feed. They were rotating guard positions during mealtime. Vector's comm chirped. "Security Chief, this is Station Commander. I'm getting reports of unusual activity in Childcare Facility 1. Status?" Vector looked at me, then at Petra, then at the cubs maintaining their sophisticated defensive perimeter around a pile of teacups. "The cubs have formed a government," he said into his comm, "and the human thinks it's interesting." So Station Commander Dralvin decided this situation required his personal attention, which meant my morning went from bizarre to politically complicated in under 10 minutes. He arrived with Mirzal, our xenopsychology specialist, who had more letters after her name than most species had in their entire alphabet. Mirzal took one look at the cub formation and pulled out her scanner, making those little humming sounds she always made when data didn't match her expectations. "Impossible," she said, which seemed to be everyone's favorite word that morning. "Their prefrontal cortex development doesn't support this level of executive function." "And yet," Petra said from her bench, still drinking tea. Commander Dralvin was less interested in cognitive development and more interested in why his childcare facility looked like a military installation. "Thelksin, explain." I gave him the summary. "Cubs built fortifications. Cubs maintain defensive perimeter. Cubs demonstrate coordinated tactical behavior. Human archaeologist treats it like fascinating research opportunity." "Make them stop," he said. I tried. "They've claimed territory. They're defending it. They're cubs. Override their pack hierarchy. Establish dominance." Petra made a sound. Not quite a laugh. More like a snort of disbelief. "That's a terrible idea." Dralvin turned to her. "You're an archaeologist. This is behavioral psychology. Different field. I study how civilizations form. This is how civilizations form. You go in there trying to establish dominance. They're going to interpret it as an invasion. And they've already proven they can organize a defense." "They're cubs," Dralvin repeated, like saying it more times would make it more relevant. "They're cubs with a defensive strategy and the coordination to implement it. You really want to test whether they'll fight to protect what they've claimed." Mirzal moved closer to the formation, scanner active. Tusk tracked her movement. "Remarkable. Their stress hormones are elevated but stable. They're not in panic mode. They're in alert mode. That's sophisticated emotional regulation." "Can you sedate them?" Dralvin asked. "Not without breaching their perimeter. And sedating one would trigger protective responses in the others. We'd have to sedate all 23 simultaneously." "So do that." Petra stood up. "Or, and this is just a suggestion, you could try negotiating." Everyone looked at her. "Negotiating," Dralvin said flatly. "With cubs. With organized cubs who've demonstrated strategic thinking and territorial control. Yes, negotiating. They don't have language. They have communication. I've watched them coordinate. They're using different vocalizations for different situations. That's proto-language at minimum. Mirsal's scanner beeped. She looked at the readings, made that humming sound again, louder this time. The human might be correct. I'm detecting pattern consistency in their vocal exchanges. It's rudimentary, but it's structured. Dralvin looked like he wanted to retire. This is a childcare facility. We don't negotiate with the children. Why not? Petra asked. Because they're children. But they're organized children, with territory and a defensive strategy. At what point does ignoring their agency become negligence? I'd worked with Petra for 3 weeks. I'd watched her document pottery shards with the same careful attention most people reserved for dangerous explosives. I'd seen her spend 6 hours cataloging a single artifact because she wanted to get the notation exactly right. I hadn't realized she was also willing to completely dismantle station command hierarchy before breakfast. Dralvin's comm chirped again. Commander, we have a situation developing. The Cubs in Facility 2 are watching the feeds from Facility 1. They're attempting to replicate the formation. Everyone went quiet. How many Cubs in Facility 2? Dralvin asked. 18. And Facility 3? 15. They're moving furniture. They appear to be copying the defensive structure. Petra smiled. Just a little, like she'd proven a point. This is escalating, Vector said. We need to contain it now before we have 3 facilities under Cub control. How do you contain an idea? Petra asked. They've seen what's possible. They're implementing it. You can dismantle the cups here, but they'll just build new formations with different resources. The concept has already spread. Mirsal moved closer, scanner forgotten, watching the Cubs with pure academic fascination. They're teaching each other. Look at Tusk. He's demonstrating position holding to the younger Cubs. That's cultural transmission. That's learned behavior being passed between individuals. That's a disaster, Dralvin said. That's evolution, Petra corrected. Accelerated, maybe. Unusual, definitely. But this is how social structures develop. Someone figures out a better system, others adopt it. The group reorganizes around the new model. In 3 hours? Human children can learn a new game and teach it to others in 3 hours. Why is this different? Because these aren't human children. These are predator cubs with limited cognitive development and pack instincts that prioritize violence. Petra walked toward the formation again. Tusk watched her, but didn't escalate. She got to the edge of the perimeter, crouched down to cub eye level. Dralvin is right about one thing, she said to Tusk, like she was having a conversation. You can't maintain this indefinitely. You need more space. You need better resources. You need territory that isn't our T-station. Tusk made a sound. Questioning, maybe. Hard to tell. What if we gave you actual territory? Space that's yours, where you can organize however you want. You're negotiating, Dralvin said. With a cub. I'm proposing a solution. He's listening. That's more progress than we've made with traditional approaches. Mirsal pulled out her personal pad, making notes so fast her fingers blurred. This is unprecedented. If the Cubs are responding to diplomatic overtures, that suggests theory of mind, self-awareness, social cognition beyond pack dynamics. The comm system activated station-wide. All personnel, be advised, childcare facilities 2 and 3 are now under Cub defensive control. Do not attempt to intervene. Repeat, do not intervene. Situation is being assessed. Dralvin closed his eyes for a long moment. When he opened them, he looked at me. Thelgsin, you're the childcare administrator. You know these cubs better than anyone. What happens if we try to dismantle their formations by force? I watched Tusk maintain his position, watched the other cubs hold their coordination, watched them demonstrate capabilities that my training said were impossible. "They'll fight," I said, "and we'll have to hurt them to win. And even if we do win, we won't have solved anything." Because Petra's right. They've learned something. You can't unlearn an idea. So we surrender our facilities to cubs. We adapt our understanding of what cubs are capable of, and we respond accordingly. Vector's comm went active. "Security Chief, Facility 2 cubs have established supply caches. They're stockpiling nutritional packets. They're planning for extended occupation." Petra laughed. Actually laughed. "They're thinking ahead. That's logistical planning. That's resource management. That's 3 childcare facilities we've lost operational control of," Dralvin said. "You haven't lost control. The cubs are maintaining order. They're feeding themselves. They're coordinating their activities. They're doing everything we wanted them to do, just with more autonomy than we expected." Mirsal looked up from her pad. "The human raises a valid point. What specifically are the cubs doing wrong? They're not destroying property. They're not fighting each other. They're not disrupting station operations beyond occupying space they already occupied. They're just organized now." "They've formed governments without authorization," Dralvin said. "Do cubs need authorization to organize themselves?" The silence that followed that question felt heavy. Tusk made another sound. Different this time. The cubs shifted, and I realized they were expanding their formation. Not aggressively, methodically. They were incorporating more territory, one careful movement at a time. "They're still adapting," I said. "They're learning what they can do, testing boundaries." Petra stood up, walked back to her bench, picked up her tea. In archaeology, when we find evidence of sudden social organization, it usually means one of 2 things. Either there was an external threat that forced cooperation, or there was an internal revelation that made cooperation possible. "What's the revelation here?" I asked. She looked at the cubs, at their careful formation, at their coordinated movement, at Tusk, maintaining his position with calm authority. "That they could," she said simply. "That's all it took. Someone showed them organization was possible, and they implemented it. That's not animal behavior. That's cultural behavior." Dralvin's comm chirped again. "Commander, Facility 4 cubs are requesting access to Facility 1. They want to observe the formation directly." We all looked at each other. "They're requesting," Vector said. "Using actual request protocols. How?" "They're learning from station AI," Mirsal said, checking her scanner. "They've been watching us use comms. They're mimicking the behavior." Petra smiled wider. "They're adapting to your systems. That's integration, not invasion." "This is out of control," Dralvin said. But he didn't sound angry anymore. He sounded tired, and maybe a little bit amazed. Tusk barked. The formation shifted again. And in the middle of all their carefully maintained defensive positions, the cubs made space. A clear area, right in the center of their territory. They were building something new. By hour 6, the cubs controlled 5 facilities and had established what Petra kept calling trade routes with the Velcor young in the adjacent wing. I want you to understand how insane that sounds. Predator cubs, barely old enough to regulate their own body temperature, conducting diplomatic relations with a completely different species. The Velcor young were passing them toys through the ventilation gaps. The cubs were sending back nutritional packets. They'd established an exchange economy. Mirsal had stopped pretending to be scientific about it. She was just recording everything with pure joy on her face. "This is first contact protocol," she kept saying. "They're doing first contact protocol." Dralvin called an emergency meeting. Command center. Every department. Head. I had to attend via comlink because nobody trusted leaving the cubs unsupervised, even though they were clearly supervising themselves better than I ever had. Petra came with me. She brought her tea. "Situation assessment," Dralvin said, voice tight. "We have 64 cubs across 5 facilities demonstrating coordinated organization, resource management, and interspecies diplomacy. Thelksin, how is this possible?" I looked at my notes, looked at my degrees, looked at 12 cycles of experience that meant absolutely nothing right now. "I don't know, Commander. Everything I understand about predator cub development says this shouldn't be happening." "Mirsal? They're operating at cognitive levels equivalent to adolescent sentience. Not cubs, adolescents. Either our developmental models are fundamentally wrong, or something has accelerated their cognitive growth." Everyone looked at Petra. She sipped her tea. "Don't look at me. I just told them about archaeological digs." "You taught them military strategy," Vector said. "I taught them how ancient populations protected resources. It's history, not tactics." "They're using tactics. They extrapolated. That's called learning. Should I have dumbed down my explanations because I assumed they couldn't understand?" The silence that followed answered that question. "We need to regain control," Dralvin said. "Proposals?" Vector leaned forward. "Forced dispersal. We have stun equipment. We can separate them before they coordinate a response." "That will traumatize them," I said. "Potentially permanently." "They've seized station territory." "They've organized in station territory they already occupied. There's a difference." Mirsal raised a hand. "If we use force, we risk proving their defensive posture was necessary. We'll validate their threat assessment. They'll fortify more, not less." "So what do you suggest?" Dralvin asked. "We let cubs run station operations?" "We negotiate," Petra said, again, still like it was obvious. "I will not negotiate with children." "Then you're going to have a war with children. Is that better?" The door chimed. Dralvin's assistant poked her head in. "Commander, there's a situation developing in Facility 1. "What now?" "The cubs have filed a formal complaint." Complete silence. "Say that again," Dralvin said. "They accessed the station complaint system through the facility terminal. Filed a formal grievance. It's in the queue. Cubs don't have access credentials." They watched Thelksin use the system. They memorized the access sequence. The complaint is properly formatted and cites station regulations. Petra put down her tea. "Can I see it?" The assistant transferred it to the main display. We all read it together. "Formal complaint, Facility 1, Collective Adult Interference in Organizational Development Station Regulation 847C, Right to Peaceful Assembly Station Regulation 3 Protection from Arbitrary Removal, Grievance, Adult, Personnel attempting to dismantle legitimate organizational structures without cause. Request recognition of territorial boundaries and cessation of threatening behavior. Submitted by Facility 1 Cubs, Representative Tusk." I read it twice. They cited station regulations. "Correctly," the assistant added. "The regulations apply. We don't have age restrictions on peaceful assembly. We don't have protocols for removing occupants from space without documented safety violations." "They're cubs," Dralvin said, but he sounded less certain now. They're organized cubs citing legal protections, Petra said. That's not animal behavior. That's civic engagement. Mirsal was laughing, actually laughing. They've achieved legal personhood through paperwork. This is magnificent. This is a disaster. This is evolution happening in real time. Commander, you're witnessing the birth of a new social structure. This is what I studied for 40 cycles to maybe see once, and it's happening in your childcare facility over breakfast dishes. My comm chirped. Private channel. I checked it. Message from Facility 1 terminal. We wish to negotiate territorial boundaries. Request Petra as mediator. She understands. I showed it to Petra. She smiled. See? Diplomacy. You can't seriously suggest we engage in diplomatic relations with cubs, Dralvin said. Why not? They're engaging in diplomatic relations with us, with the Velcor young. They're building a functional society. At what point do you acknowledge what's actually happening here? What's happening is chaos. What's happening is emergence. Complex behavior arising from simple rules. They saw organization was possible, so they organized. They saw cooperation had benefits, so they cooperated. They saw you treated them like animals, so they proved they weren't. Vector pulled up security feeds. Commander, Facility 3 Cubs are teaching Facility 6 Cubs the formation patterns. It's spreading faster now. They're creating training protocols. And Facility 2 has established a governance structure, Mirsal added, checking her pad. I'm monitoring their vocalizations. They're assigning roles. Leader, scouts, resource managers. They've created a command hierarchy. Dralvin looked at each of us. This station has protocols, procedures, chain of command. We don't abandon those because cubs learned to stack cups. They didn't just stack cups, Petra said quietly. They built a civilization in 6 hours, and you're so focused on maintaining control that you're missing the miracle happening in front of you. Miracles don't file formal complaints. Sentient beings do. That word hung in the air. Sentient, not cubs, not animals. Sentient. Mirsal stopped laughing. The human is correct. If they're demonstrating self-awareness, social organization, legal understanding, and diplomatic capability, then by definition, they meet sentience criteria, which means we can't treat them as cubs anymore. They're 3 months old, I said. 4 at most. How can they be sentient? How long does sentience require? Petra asked. Human children develop self-awareness at 2 years. Some species take 10, some take 20. Maybe predator cubs develop faster when given the opportunity. Maybe we've been underestimating them because we never gave them the chance to show what they could do. My comm chirped again. Different channel. Station AI. Alert. Multiple facilities reporting coordinated activity. Cubs establishing inter-facility communication network. Behavior patterns suggest emergent collective intelligence. The AI recognizes it too, I said, showing everyone the message. The cubs are building something larger than individual facilities. They're networking. Dralvin stood up. I'm going to Facility 1. I'll assess this situation personally. Bad idea, Petra said. You represent authority they've already decided to challenge. You walk in there. They'll interpret it as escalation. I'm the station commander. And they've filed a complaint against station authority. Let me talk to them first. You're not qualified. I'm the only one they've asked for. That makes me perfectly qualified. They stared at each other. Dralvin trying to maintain control. Petra completely unbothered by his rank or his authority or his 12 cycles of command experience. Fine, he said finally. You talk to them, but I'm watching the feeds, and if this gets worse, we're implementing containment protocols. It won't get worse, Petra said, picking up her tea again. It's going to get interesting. We left the command center. Petra walked like she was heading to another artifact cataloging session. I followed like I was walking to my own execution. When we reached Facility 1, the Cubs were waiting. They'd rearranged their formation, created a central space, a meeting area. Tusk stood in the center, flanked by 2 other Cubs. The rest maintained perimeter positions, but less defensively now, more like formal guards than combat positions. Petra walked straight to the center, sat down cross-legged on the floor facing Tusk. "Okay," she said, "let's talk about your civilization." Tusk made a sound. The other Cubs echoed it, not threatening, more like agreement, and my entire understanding of child development died with a whimper. Petra negotiated with predator Cubs for 2 hours, while I watched my career expectations crumble like ancient pottery. She sat there, cross-legged, tea getting cold beside her, having what looked like an actual diplomatic summit. Tusk would make sounds. She'd respond with words. The other Cubs would vocalize. She'd nod like she understood perfectly. Maybe she did. I'd stopped assuming I knew anything about anything. "Here's what I'm understanding," Petra said, speaking slowly, clearly. "You want dedicated territory, space that's yours, where you can organize without adult interference. Is that right?" Tusk made a low rumbling sound that somehow conveyed affirmation. "And you want recognition, not as Cubs who need constant supervision, but as a group capable of managing your own affairs." Another sound. Definitely agreement. "Okay, I can work with that. But you need to understand something too. The adults here, they're responsible for your safety. That's not negotiable. So we need to find a compromise. Territory for you, safety assurance for them." Tusk tilted his head, considering. Then he made a series of sounds, gesturing with one paw at the other Cubs, at the facility, at the doors. Petra watched him. "You're saying you can maintain safety better than the current system?" More sounds, emphatic now. "Because you've established order, guard rotations, resource management. Everyone has a role." She nodded. "That's fair. You've actually reduced incidents compared to standard pack chaos. Thelkson, how many fights this week?" I checked my incident log. None. 0 physical altercations since the formation began. "See? They're maintaining better order than traditional supervision methods." She looked back at Tusk. "But the adults won't accept this unless you make concessions too. Give up some territory. Maintain communication protocols. Prove this isn't just temporary organization that'll collapse into violence." Tusk made a questioning sound. "I know you don't trust them yet. They haven't trusted you either. But trust builds through demonstrated reliability. You show them you can maintain order, they'll give you more autonomy. That's how civilization building works." My comm chirped. Mirsal on private channel. "Thelkson, I'm analyzing the vocal patterns. She's right. They're communicating complex concepts. This is actual dialogue, not training commands." I watched Petra gesture at the walls, at the space around them, mapping out territory proposals with her hands. Watched Tusk respond with his own gestures, counter-proposing. Watched other Cubs chime in with supporting or dissenting vocalizations. They were having a committee meeting. "Facilities 1, 2, and 3, Petra said. "Combined into one larger territory under your governance. Walls removed, space connected. You maintain internal organization however you want. In exchange, you accept observer status for adult personnel. We watch. We don't interfere unless there's genuine safety risk. And you establish formal communication channels with station administration. Tusk looked at the other cubs, made a sound. They responded, a chorus of different vocalizations. Debating, discussing. Some agreement, some objection, working through it together. They're voting, I said into my comm. I see it, Dralvin responded. Cubs are voting on treaty terms. This is my life now. The debate went on for several minutes. Then Tusk turned back to Petra, made a decisive sound. Accepted? She asked. Affirmative rumble. Okay, I'll present the terms to station command. She stood up, picked up her cold tea, looked at me. You should probably be part of this negotiation. You're their primary administrator. I don't speak cub. Neither do I. But I speak civilization, and apparently, so do they. We went back to the command center. Petra presented her negotiated terms like she'd been doing interspecies diplomacy for cycles instead of cataloging pottery shards. 3 facilities combined, Dralvin repeated, under cub governance. Under their own organizational structure, Petra corrected. With adult observers present but not interfering. They maintain order. We maintain safety oversight. It's a reasonable compromise. It sets precedent. What happens when the Velcor young want the same thing? Or the Hrental juveniles? We'll have youth governments throughout the station. Would that be bad? Mirsal asked. The cubs have demonstrated better self-organization than traditional supervision methods. Maybe we've been approaching youth development wrong all along. Vector pulled up incident reports. Security calls to childcare facilities are down 78% since the formations began. They're self-policing. I hate that it works, but it works. It works because they're sentient, Petra said. And you treated them like animals until they proved otherwise. Now you're just catching up to reality. Dralvin looked at me. Thelgson, professional opinion. Can we trust them to maintain this organization long-term? I thought about Tusk maintaining his position for hours, about cubs rotating guard shifts with disciplined precision, about the formal complaint they'd filed, properly formatted, correctly cited. I think they're more reliable than we are, I said. They created a functional government in 6 hours. We've been arguing about it for 8. That's not a professional opinion. You want my professional opinion? My professional opinion is that every assumption I had about predator cub development was wrong. They're capable of abstract thinking, social organization, legal reasoning, and diplomatic negotiation. Either our entire field of developmental psychology needs rewriting, or we've been systematically underestimating them because we never gave them the opportunity to prove themselves. Either way, the cubs win this argument. Dralvin sat back in his chair, closed his eyes. Approved. 3 facilities, combined territory, provisional autonomous governance with adult oversight, 6-week trial period. Thank you, Petra said, like she'd just been thanked for her artifact documentation instead of rewriting station childcare policy. The implementation took 3 days. Walls came down. Facilities 1, 2, and 3 became one connected territory. The cubs watched the construction with obvious satisfaction. When the last wall section was removed, Tusk made a sound that echoed through all 3 former facilities. The cubs responded as one. Then they got to work. They didn't just maintain their defensive formations. They evolved them. Created designated areas for eating, sleeping, playing. Established patrol routes that maximized coverage with minimum effort. developed a rotation system that ensured everyone got rest while maintaining security. The Velcor young formally requested observer status, then participation status, then full integration. Within 2 weeks, we had a multi-species youth government operating with more efficiency than most adult committees. Petra went back to her artifacts. She showed up every morning, made her tea, worked on her cataloging, while cubs ran parliamentary sessions around her feet. They'd given her permanent neutral status in their territory. She could come and go freely. She was, according to Mirsal's translations, the one who understood first. I had to rewrite every protocol in my department. Mirsal had to revise her entire dissertation. Vector had to train his security team on diplomatic engagement with organized youth populations. And Dralvin had to file reports with Station Command, explaining why cubs were filing requisition requests for expanded territory using proper administrative channels. 3 months later, I was sitting in my office reviewing incident reports. 0 fights, 0 injuries, 0 disciplinary actions. The cubs managed themselves better than I'd ever managed them. My door chimed. Petra walked in, artifact sample in one hand, tea in the other. "Question," she said. "The cubs want to establish formal diplomatic relations with the Relnoth excavation site. Apparently, some of the artifacts have youth cultural significance. The artifacts are 4,000 years old, and the cubs think understanding ancient youth culture would inform their own development. They've filed a research proposal. It's actually pretty good. Well-structured arguments, clear methodology, cited sources." I looked at the proposal on my screen. 12 pages, properly formatted. Collaborative authorship from 15 different cubs. They're writing academic papers now. They're curious about their place in historical context. That's sophisticated cultural thinking. She sipped her tea. "I'm approving their excavation site visits if you are. They'll be supervised. They'll follow protocols. And they'll probably learn more than most adult researchers. Because you'll teach them. Because they want to learn. That's all it ever took. Someone willing to treat them like they were capable of learning." I approved the proposal, added my signature to the most surreal document I'd ever processed. Petra turned to leave, stopped at the door. "You know what's funny? Everyone kept asking what I did to make the cubs act like this. I didn't do anything. I just talked to them like they mattered. Explained things like they could understand, respected their attempts at organization, treated them like people. That's revolutionary, apparently. That's just basic decency. You all were so focused on managing them that you forgot to notice them." She smiled. "I study dead civilizations. You were living with an emerging one and couldn't see it because you were too busy enforcing protocols." She left. I sat there, looking at my degrees on the wall. All that training, all that expertise. Completely useless because I'd been asking the wrong questions. The cubs didn't need management. They needed opportunity. And a human archaeologist who studied ancient garbage showed us that in 6 hours by making tea and talking about defensive architecture. My comm chirped. "Message from Tusk, sent through proper channels, formatted correctly. Request, Thelxin designated as permanent liaison to Facility Union. Your expertise valuable. Your willingness to learn appreciated." I sent back acceptance. Then I went down to the combined facility territory. The cubs were in session, debating resource allocation for the upcoming station festival. Tusk saw me, made a welcoming sound. The other cubs acknowledged my presence without disrupting their discussion. Petra was in her corner, documenting a pottery shard, tea steaming beside her. She looked up when I sat down nearby. "They invited you in?" she asked. Formally, I'm the liaison now. Congratulations. You're a diplomat to a civilization that's 3 months old. How is this my life? She smiled. You witnessed emergence. Not everyone gets that privilege. Most archaeologists like me, we only see the aftermath, the ruins, the fragments. You got to watch it happen in real time. Below us, the cubs continued their debate. Orderly, engaged, building something new. They're going to change everything, I said. They already did, Petra replied. We're just catching up. She went back to her artifacts. I watched the cubs govern themselves. And somewhere in my mind, 12 cycles of assumptions finished crumbling into dust.